Hello, I'm Donna Skell, along with my co-host Tiffany Ross. Welcome to A Time to Dream. We're brought to you by Roaring Lambs Ministry, a ministry that wants to help you amplify your faith and tell your story about what God has done in your life. We are here at the NRB. It is just so exciting. NRB is the National Religious Broadcasters Convention, and all the Christian communicators are here. People on television, radio, internet, worship leaders, pastors, anybody who communicates the Word of God is at NRB. So we get lots of workshops to attend to learn more about technology and everything else, and we get to make new friends and see our old friends, and it's just a wonderful week this year. It's in Dallas, Texas, so we are here. If you hear a little background noise, that's just ambience here at NRB. So you've heard the phrase, children are our future, and that is indeed true. We are currently seeing a battle unfold for the hearts and minds of our children, with the startling reality that a good, wholesome future is hanging in the balance. Our guest today has decided to enter the fight with the determination to see a bright future for our children. A Time to Dream welcomes Mark Hancock.
Thank you, Tiffany. It's great to be here.
Yeah, glad you're here. Mark began his career founding a national advertising agency and running it for 15 years. His conversion to Christ led him into ministry as a youth and college pastor, an associate pastor, a homeless ministry director, and a global event director for an international ministry. He holds 2 master's degrees in mental health counseling, and he spent a number of years in private practice, and he's taught at secular and Christian colleges. Having been featured on numerous TV and radio shows, Mark was named to the American Family Association's 40 Faithful. He's the author, he's a conference speaker, and now he serves as Chief Executive Officer for Trail Life USA. Mark and his wife of over 30 years live in South Carolina and have 2 sons. So we are so glad to have Mark on our show. And Mark, we're interested in your story, and so stories always have a beginning, and that's where we want to start with you. So if you'll tell us a little bit about your childhood and your growing up years.
I would love to. I was raised in a family of 4 kids. I was a middle kid, which comes along with all those typical challenges, and also there's some strengths in there somewhere as middle kids, the compromises, one in the middle pulling things together. And so that obviously had an influence on my interest in mental health counseling, as you mentioned.
Yes.
Wanting to keep everybody getting along. Wonderful family. We attended church regularly. I'm very active in the church, Presbyterian church in Florida, in South Florida. My dad was a lay preacher, one of the best preachers I've ever known. In fact, on Sunday mornings when the pastor wasn't there, if he was out of town, my dad would fill in for him, and more people would attend on those mornings. He was just a great speaker. But he ran an advertising agency.
Interesting.
Which sort of set me up and kind of groomed me, and for that business, which I really loved. And so right out of college, I ended up starting an advertising agency.
That's neat.
So with your dad, somehow I feel like the apple didn't fall too far from the tree with your dad. You're very personable, and seems like you've got a good read on people, and your dad was probably the same, and charismatic and could really give the message clearly. But based on your resume, Mark, I mean, you are really you're very unassuming, but I read this resume and I say type A all the way, So you're a very laid back type A, or God has woven your experience. But I'm curious, what caused you to choose what you did choose in college, for mental health, and all of that?
Okay. Well, that came much later.
Okay.
In college, I was an English, speech, and drama major, and because I knew I was going in the ad business.
Okay.
And so an English degree, doesn't make much of a living for you unless you're going to teach.
Right.
But I was really interested in literature. In fact, my specialty was Shakespeare, and I love studying Shakespeare.
Wow.
And I knew I was going in the ad business. So when I graduated, I actually went to work for my dad's company, but he had sold it a couple months before I graduated. And I could tell that the new owner was taking it a different direction, and that's when I started my own agency when I was about 22, 23 years old.
Wow,
And
ambitious.
it grew really quickly.
Yeah.
And I don't know, the type A thing, I get that, but you know, God does interesting things. He opens doors that we can never open.
Right.
No matter how charismatic or type A or driven we are. I see a lot of people who push doors open and make things happen.
Yeah.
I have a lot of respect for the energy that they have, the passion they have for getting things done.
Yeah.
But I found that if you just follow after him, you hold everything with a light touch. As you say, I read my resume sometimes, it's like, geez, there's a guy who doesn't know what he wants to be when he grows up. It's more like, my wife and I have always said, we just hold what we're doing with light touch.
Yes.
And God manages to take everything that you've done up to that point and shape it for the next thing. So it hasn't been I never would have said, you know what I want to be? I'm going to be the CEO of a 30,000 member boys organization. I wasn't in Boy Scouts. I wasn't really avid camper or any of those sorts of things. But I can see how he took everything that he had done with me and said, this is what I need you to do next. And so that's sort of how those things have happened. I went to in my 30s, I went back to school and got 2 degrees, one in mental health counseling, one in marriage and family therapy. One was from a Christian college, one was from a secular college. Because I looked at it and I thought, all wisdom is of God.
Yes.
So I want the Christian background because I want churches to appreciate, the God approach to how I'll be talking with people. But I also want to find out what these people are talking about over on the secular, what's working for people. And they don't know it, but a lot of the principles and things that they're walking in secular counseling is out of the Bible. They just don't know that.
Yeah.
And so I was able to weave those things together, and that's where that came from. Just a real interest in helping people. My wife and I were therapeutic foster parents.
Oh,
and
great.
Our first foster kid came along with a therapist because he was very needy, and that just created an interest in that for me. And at some point I said, I want to go do this myself. So it was really later on that I went back and said, I want to go learn more about this. So it's been sort of following a path that he's taken us on.
Yes.
And it's an odd way to get where I am, but it was his way. So.
So Mark, I know that you grew up in a Christian home and your parents were very active in the church, but it takes a encounter with Christ, a personal choice to invite Jesus to be Lord of your life. Tell us about that experience in your life.
Yeah, I really lived that out. I can say that I'm the guy who was very active in church, a youth group leader, but I didn't believe anything. When I say youth group leader, I was a leader in the youth group. But I went off to college, and like you hear over and over again, I strayed.
Yes.
And it wasn't until a number of years into my career that I had an encounter with a guy who I'd gone to high school with. He went in the Marines, and I went to college. And in the Marines, he was miraculously healed on the operating table in Okinawa. They were going to do a kidney operation. A guy walked in his room, a man named David, who he'd never met, and said, "Can I pray for you?" Prayed for him. They ran the tests again, and they sent him home. So he was miraculous. So he came to Christ. Well, he was my partying friend in high school. And so I was going to Philadelphia on business, and I thought, I'm going to look him up. And so I actually stayed in his apartment, and what I didn't know, Donna, is that the whole time that I was there, I would go out for my appointments, and he had his prayer team come to his apartment. They were laying hands on my luggage, on all my clothes, and everything, praying for me, because he had come to the Lord through that radical transformation. And I came face to face, and that was my faith crisis, because I thought I was raised in the church.
Right.
I thought I knew Jesus. And I saw his life, and I saw the way that he lived his life, the decisions that he had made, the conviction that he had. I thought, man, I am playing with God. I am not for real. And that challenged me. And the change that it brought upon my life, and I'm sure your viewers do, they've dealt with this at some time. At some point, you come to that question.
Yeah.
What are you going to do with what it is that you now know?
Right.
And I had a successful advertising agency that I was not running under godly principles, that it had blown up. I was 26 years old with a national advertising agency, offices in Florida and Atlanta. I was traveling all over the country and just thought I had it all going on. And I got face to face with myself and my hypocrisy around who it is that I thought that Jesus was. And so that ultimately led to laying down the advertising agency, all that stuff that I thought that I had made, and recognizing that I can do nothing of myself. And that was my crisis of faith. And that friend of mine, who I'm still great friends with, led me through that. And he became my mentor. I was in Florida, he was in Philadelphia, and we would talk on the phone just about every day and walk me through it. And finally, I thought that he and I were the only two real Christians in the world. And finally he said, you need to go to a church. And I got to a church, got involved there, and ended up being on staff there as an associate pastor over the course of a couple of years, and running the homeless ministry and some of those other things that you're. And then I ended up traveling around the world, putting together evangelistic crusades all over the world, seeing thousands of people come to Christ.
Wow.
And just all out of that one encounter in Philadelphia,
Yes.
was put before me, choose ye this day whom will you serve. And I knew I was going to have to lay down the success to take this path. And I'm so glad that I did.
That is so well said. Tiffany and I have done hundreds of interviews, and most people don't articulate that as well as you did. You might have grown up in a Christian home. You might have always known there was a God. You might have known about Jesus. But there comes a time in your adult life where when you seek, you will understand what you already knew. Mark always knew that Jesus was the Son of God, but there was an understanding that took place when he really yielded his life to God. And I love what you said about you were playing with God in a sense, because you knew about him.
Sure,
but
I'm a Christian.
Yes.
I was raised in a Christian home, and I came face to face with that lie. And I'm so glad I chose.
Oh man,
Right.
Mark, when you just said face to face, I have to believe this is a God thing, because I'm a musician, I sing, and there's a line in a song that says, "We are changed when we come face to face with the awe of grace," right?
That's beautiful.
And it's not until we really encounter and we can see in our mind's eye just those beautiful eyes of our Savior, full of love.
Yeah.
So I want to just touch on the ministry part of your life, and I know it's all ministry still, but you were an associate pastor, a youth pastor, homeless ministry. Is there a moment that stands out to you where you just saw and felt Christ moving so strongly in a person, in a group?
Oh, I would say that I had the privilege of serving Dr. T.L. Osborne around the world. A lot of people don't know him in the United States, who's contemporary with Billy Graham and those guys, and they said they'll take the United States, and T.L. said, I'll go to the world. He's passed on now, but he's the one who I served for 5 years on a volunteer basis. I would go into a country and set up an event. We'd have tens of thousands of people at these crusades. And he was such a humble man. He was a beautiful man. He a lot of times in these kind of healing evangelistic ministries, we see all the focus on the person.
Yes.
He was always going to focus to Jesus. And I can remember multiple times I'm thinking about when you said that, can you pick out something? I remember being in Africa, and he had delivered a message on healing. And I was standing on the platform, and my job was to take people who were coming forward saying, God touched me, and seeing if it was really true. Because a lot of people were saying they were there by faith to say, God healed me, but they were saying that by faith. I mean, the healing may not have manifested. So I was sort of the bouncer. And so I had this beautiful perspective, and I saw from the back of the crowd this motion and this group of people moving towards the platform. And in the center of this group of people was this tall African man in all the African garb. And he was in the middle of this crowd moving to the stage. And they brought him up the side, and they helped him up there. And he said, I've been healed. I said, tell him about that. He says, I can see.
Oh, wow.
And so this group of people were this people who loved this man of wisdom and stature in that tribal culture, and he was like a chief in their eyes, and they all loved him so much that they followed. They came up with him up the stage, and he stood on that platform and shared his testimony. And to see him look down into the crowd and hear these people who had cared for him in his blindness for years, cheering and yelling and celebrating, and him pointing and saying, that's you. That's you.
Wow.
Because he had only heard their voices, and now he's seeing their faces for the first time. And he's putting, oh, that's you. That's you. What a powerful moment
Oh,
it was to
yes.
see Jesus move on that man and heal that man, and see him, just see for the first time the faces of these people who had loved him so much and had taken care of him and allowed him to minister because he was a powerful man with great wisdom. That was a moment that really stood out.
Wow, that's great. Now, how did you make the transition from ministry and traveling all over the world to Trail Life USA?
Oh, gosh. I'm probably the least likely person to be doing what I'm doing. Like I said earlier, I was not involved in Boy Scouts. And when people ask, the quick definition is we're a Christ-centered alternative to the Boy Scouts. But in reality, we're not an alternative because if you care about Christ-centered and you care about boy-focused, there is no alternative.
Yes,
we're not
right.
the same thing, but we look alike, and so you say that sometimes because I get what you do now. You're outdoors, you're hiking,
Yes,
you're camping,
yeah.
uniforms, handbooks, guides, awards, all those sorts of things. But somehow I ended up in this room of 50 people in Louisville, Kentucky, who, after the Boy Scouts began to lose their way, they gathered together, and there are 4 different factions that came together and said, we have to do something for boys because the Boy Scouts are abandoning their traditional values. And so those 4 factions, beautiful weekend, another God thing, a day and a half together where all these people came together with their own ministries saying, I'm going to lay this down. We're all going to do this together. It doesn't have to be my thing. We're going to do this together. And everybody laid down their own visions. And we came out of that room after that weekend with one vision. 68 days later in Nashville, Kentucky, we held our inaugural convention. 68 days later, the 50 people, we didn't even know each other.
Wow.
And somehow I ended up at that 50, I ended up being on the steering committee, which later became the board of directors. And in the meeting, first time all of us sitting around the table together in Louisville, everybody else left, and they said, we want to do a conference. You have 68 days to put a conference together. So here's the 7 of us looking at each other like, and the question
Who
was
knows
asked,
how to do
has
this?
anybody ever done a conference? And I'm like, I have, but Paris, Buenos Aires, Tokyo, Costa Rica, Ghana, I've done a couple in the United States. And so I ended up leading that charge for them. 68 days later, we had 1,100 men and 100 women come from 44 states. Governor Mike Huckabee was our keynote, gave our keynote address, and we launched the idea of Trail Life. 3 months later, we launched with 10,000 members on our first day.
Whoa.
So it's been that sort of a journey.
Yeah.
So how did I make the transition? I don't know, other than I had 2 boys who were in Boy Scouts, and I attended all the meetings because we're homeschooling parents. You don't drop your kids at anything. I attended all the meetings, but I remember being asked, would you be a leader in the troop? And I asked that question. I answered that thing that you should know God's always listening, because what I said was, I'm not really interested in leading in a boys' organization. That was Boy Scouts, and God had something else in mind. So I was a dad there, but I saw what was happening in Boy Scouts, and we needed to do something else. And somehow I got caught up in that movement, unlike the guy who was there. But it's almost like God needed somebody from the outside of that culture to have a fresh approach.
Yeah.
So one of our first employees was a 20-year executive of Boy Scouts of America. The other was the former general counsel of Boy Scouts of America.
Wow.
So we had plenty of knowledge about how to do this, but it helped that I came in from the outside with a perspective that was different.
Yes.
And so that's how that happened. I sort of had the pastoral perspective, the Christian ministry perspective.
Yes.
Understanding the power of a volunteer, because I work with volunteers all over the world, and so that piece, God was saying, I need that in Trail Life. So, like I said earlier, it wasn't a position that I saw or could even dream of. It didn't even exist before then. It was like God had prepared me for that time, and it's been a humbling experience, because I would wake up for the first 3 or 4 years of Trail Life in the middle of the night saying, God, are you sure? I mean, there's people who know more about this stuff than I do.
Yeah.
And just really crying out to him, you've got to help me, because but he's so faithful.
Yes.
And he just kept saying, You're the one.
Yes.
You're the one I need right now. So
Wow.
get over yourself. Get up and go to work.
Okay, so we just interviewed Patty Garibay, head of American Girls Heritage.
Right.
And for those of you listening, that's the girls' counterpoint.
Yeah.
Part to the Girl Scouts and Trail Life and faith-based. And what I love about both of your stories is she's just a powerhouse.
Yeah.
But when we asked her about goals and all of that, she said, I just want to follow the next step that God says. It's not in 10 years we're going to have 50 million. You know, it was just, I want to follow the next step that God has. And I see you doing the same way, the same path. I want to touch really quickly just on the culture that we are living in, and you're definitely swimming upstream. You are on the front lines because we live in an age that talks about toxic masculinity, right? And that boys are not allowed to really just be boys, you know, and be the men that God chose them to be.
Right.
What do you find is the greatest challenge right now in doing this in this culture?
Oh, what a great question. First of all, we have a book out, a free book called Let Boys Be Boys, which your viewers can download from our website. And it talks about some of the challenges that boys are going through. Boys are twice as likely to be special education, 3 times more likely to be declared ADHD. They're falling behind girls in every single academic category. Suicide, depression, drug abuse is mowing them down in record numbers because we're in this culture where it's okay. We love girls. Girls are great. It's okay to lift girls up and tell them they can do anything, but we don't say that to boys anymore. It's almost as if boyhood is some sort of social disease that needs to be eradicated. We don't speak those powerful messages to boys. You're strong. You can do anything because we're afraid they're going to go shoot somebody. You know, the toxic masculinity has just painted every boy as if he's a danger to society. And we know there's dangerous men, but if you look at our history, you can make the argument that a lot of what we've accomplished as a culture is because of winning and focused men who said, I'm going to take this risk, I'm going to take this competition. The kind of stuff that's built into men, because men and women are different.
Yes,
Right.
Women are smarter, but men are more determined and more focused on adventure and on taking on a challenge. So we've got to engage boys with that for the next generation. Sometimes I look at it and I say, I think we've lost this generation to a culture that's a mess. But I'll tell you what, we're preparing a generation through Trail Life USA of boys who I believe are going to be the remnant that's going to rise and make a difference. We're not just preparing boys for an uncertain currents of a culture. We're preparing boys to turn the tide of the culture. We're raising them up to with the absolutes that we understand as believers that society has ignored and dismissed. We're saying, no, there are such things as absolute truths. And we believe that in those 30,000 boys that we have across the country in 900 churches, all 50 states, there is a remnant that's going to rise and save us. Because it's almost too late for some of us to get into the culture and make those sorts of changes. But they're rising up with such an understanding of who it is that they are in Christ. And they're being recognized for the strengths that they have. We love American Heritage Girls. They were at that meeting in Louisville. Yeah. They put that meeting together. So Patty Garibay, great friend, had dinner with her last night. You know, our organizations work together a lot. We're separate, but we work together a lot because we're in the same space. But they're specifically girls and loving it. We love that they're there because they're raising the wives to our boys, and we're specifically boys. And they love we're here. So when I look at where it is that we're going as a culture, we have the answer. The answer is it's in sowing into the next generation the things that we know.
Why don't you speak right to the parents of young boys, and that way you're just speaking right to them.
Listen, it's hard for your boys. You know, think about the culture they're growing up in today, the things that they're facing that we didn't have to face. A lot of boys are being born and raised in a culture right now where it's always been you can marry whoever it is that you want to. And that is such an absurd thought to us who understand the design of God. But boys are being raised in that. So they need special attention, they need special care. They need for men to rise up, for godly men to rise up and become mentors for them. And one way to do that is through Trail Life USA. We have a lot of men in Trail Life USA who don't have sons in the program, but they're there to pour into the next generation. It's a great place for them to share their ministry, to share their lives. But parents, find a community, a faith-based community. You know, they're saying that the key to success in boys is, even the secular writers are saying, the key to success in boys is a faith-based community. Secular writers are saying this. And a community that recognizes the rough and tumble of boys. And that's what we do in Trail Life. And also single moms out there, I know you're crying out to God for a man to help you with your son. He's moving into puberty. You say, what do I do with this bundle of whatever emotions, and craziness and confusion? Well, there are men in Trail Life USA who are there to help. They're background checked, child safety, youth protection trained. They're in a faith community. They've signed a statement of faith, a statement of values. They are there with the intentions, the call, they believe, to help raise these fatherless boys. And so many of them in our culture today. I was in Virginia not too long ago, and afterwards, after our meeting, there was a campfire, and a lady came up to me and she says, I need to thank you. So 10 years ago, my husband died and left me with a 2-year-old son. Now he's 12 years old. And he's a navigator in Trail Life USA, and he's surrounded by godly men.
It's great.
Who are giving what I cried out to God for him to get. And my husband will want me to thank you. And isn't that Who knows how many times that's repeated over and over again. So I'm speaking with single moms. If you're looking for some help, you're doing a heroic task, a Herculean task, raising that family on your own. But I'm telling you, there's help and there's hope. The men in Trail Life want to help your son.
And you can go to traillifeusa.com, and you can probably look for the closest troop there. You can get involved there, and more than anything, your sons will come back and thank you later on for doing that. It's been a great show. Thank you, Mark Hancock. We appreciate your time, and again, we want you to look up the website, traillifeusa.com. And if you'd like to reach out to Tiffany and I, we're at atimetodream@gmail.com. You've been listening to A Time to Dream. Have a great week. Keep dreaming, and may God richly bless you.